Richard Haass is the president of the Council on Foreign Relations and the author of A World in Disarray. Hanan Ashrawi is a Palestinian lawmaker, a member of the executive committee of the PLO, and a former negotiator and spokesperson for the Palestinians. She joins us from Ramallah. And Dori Gold was Israel's ambassador to the UN, amongst many other diplomatic posts. He is president of the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs and joins us from Los Angeles. Hanan Ashrawi, let me start with you. What do you think the effect of this decision will be? Does it not simply ratify reality?
Not at all. On the contrary, it undermines the chances of peace. It totally destroys American credibility, standing, influence, and of course it disqualifies it from taking any role in peacemaking in the future. It also sends a message to the whole world that you can impose facts unilaterally outside the law and you will get away with it. But if you commit to a negotiated settlement based on legality and justice and international law, then you get no cooperation. This has moved the U.S. from being a so-called peace broker, and we knew from the beginning it was never even-handed, to becoming complicit with Israel in its crime. Israel has annexed East Jerusalem illegally in 1967, and of course it has placed West Jerusalem under its sovereignty in 1948, even though its legal status remains as a corpus separatum. So now we have a so-called peace broker that has taken sides blatantly and that has in many ways rewarded impunity and has sold out the Palestinian people as well as the chances of peace, and has succeeded in one fell swoop to undermine the security and stability of the whole region.
Dori Gold, isn't it fair to say that while this might provide some emotional satisfaction for Israelis, that it ratifies this sense of Jerusalem as their capital, which it is de facto, it does complicate, at the very least, perhaps threaten the peace process, any ultimate deal with the Palestinians, and it feels like, in return for that little emotional frisson, you're giving up a lot.
Well, I view it quite the opposite. I think in order for negotiations to succeed, and I've been involved in a series of negotiations from the days of the Hebron Accord to the Y Agreement and onward, you have to get the parties into what I call the box of realism. And unfortunately, those who've been engaged in peace negotiations on the Palestinian side haven't been there. Partly it's not their fault. Partly it's the fault of the international community, which has organizations like UNESCO, which in May 2017 adopted yet another resolution which disqualified Israel, cut off the historical and legal ties of Israel to Jerusalem. And in a certain sense, what President Trump has done, he's introduced an important correction. I may say a brave correction in that whole history of UNESCO resolutions that aren't based on international law. They're not based on truth. They're based on political power being exercised against the state of Israel.
Richard Haass, can you split the difference on this? Can you be Solomon?
No, in some ways this conversation raises the issue of why would you want to put Jerusalem out there naked, alone at the beginning as the engine, if you will, rather than the caboose. The sense was it was always going to be the most difficult issue to contend with as part of a final status. Yes, it does recognize one side of reality or reality. On the other hand, why would you do it so in an isolated way? If you are going to introduce Jerusalem, give something to the Israelis, why not ask something from the Israelis on settlements or something else? Why not give something or ask something both from the Palestinians? So my problem with this is just to trot out one thing now, the most combustible, volatile, emotional of issues, in isolation from the rest of diplomacy. I just don't understand what's the potential upside, but I do see, Fareed, an awful lot of potential downside.
All right, hold that thought. We're going to come back to talk with this. And we are back with Richard Haass, Hanan Ashrawi, and Dori Gold. Hanan Ashrawi, is it fair to say that the Palestinian cause has never been particularly strongly championed by the Arabs other than as a rhetorical matter, and now is even less central to the views of Arabs, If you look at Saudi Arabia today, it seems to be in a tacit alliance with Israel because it is obsessed with Iran. The Palestinian issue has been thrown to the wayside completely. So are you now really on the losing side of this next great power game in the Middle East?
Certainly, the Palestinian question now is in an extremely difficult position, given the realities of the region, given the bloody transition we are undergoing throughout the Arab world, given the fact that we have proxy wars in countries like Syria and Libya, and even since the war on Iraq and now the war on Yemen and so on, and since there is a new polarization attempting to create a sort of Sunni-Shiite divide at the expense of the stability and unity of the whole region. Of course, all these have sidelined the Palestinian question and deprived us of much support that we really need. So I think that given also the fact that Israel's impunity has continued without any intervention, without any question, without any accountability, and destroying the two-state solution, by the way, and given the fact that U.S. cover for Israel has come out into outright collusion and has destroyed the charade of a peace process. So now we find that the Palestinians have to sort of turn inwards and look towards themselves on the one hand to strengthen their ability to remain on the land and to withstand all these pressures and changes, and on the other hand to reach out to the international community for sources of protection and accountability for Israel. So I would say yes, these changes are extremely drastic, and I think the whole region is on the verge of serious transformations that are not necessarily positive.
Dori Gold, one of the points that Hanan Ashrawi made in a New York Times op-ed, and that Saeb Erekat, the chief Palestinian negotiator for many years, also made, is that perhaps the Palestinians will now move away from a two-state solution to a one-state solution, to say, all right, if there are these millions of Palestinians who are being denied full political rights, the right to have their own country, perhaps what we need then, the Palestinians would say, is simply voting rights within Israel. We have to be citizens of some country, and we ask them that we begin citizenship in Israel. Isn't that a real danger here? If the two-state solution evaporates, that you will end up with a one-state solution with a majority Palestinian or Arab population?
Well, let me address what the real danger is in the Middle East. You hinted at it before. But just to answer your specific question, I was the Director General of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Israel, and we had a very clear diplomatic doctrine. Our doctrine was, first, we seek to negotiate with our Palestinian neighbors. Second of all, we're prepared to reach a generous compromise with our Palestinian neighbors. And third, we seek that any structure of a solution be based on cooperation between our two societies, between our two political entities. And that's what we've been pushing. And unfortunately, we've gotten a flat no on all three of these fundamentals of our diplomatic doctrine. Now, making it all the more complex is something you alluded to. The main diplomatic actor affecting the future of the Middle East is a man by the name of General Qasem Soleimani, who is the commander of the Quds forces of the Revolutionary Guards. And today, Iranian forces have boots on the ground in Lebanon, in Syria, in Yemen, and of course in Iraq. And that is really what's changed the nature of the Middle East. And if there is a consensus among all of us who support stability and support progress, it is that this Iranian role must be discontinued. And we hope that in our diplomacy and in our connections, whether above the table or below the table, we can put the Middle East on a better footing to oppose Iranian expansionism, which is now seeking to build a land bridge from Iraq all the way to the Mediterranean and a military presence in the areas in between.
Richard, could you imagine a one-state solution with Palestinians demanding, almost in a kind of Gandhi-esque, Martin Luther King way, kind of civil disobedience that just says, look, you have to give us some kind of rights. We live on this land, you control it. We can't be forever stateless.
I can imagine people pushing for it, but I don't think it can be a solution. Israel can't be a secure, prosperous, Jewish, democratic state. And to have things move in that direction, something's got to give. But there's an irony to this whole conversation. People like me have sat on your show, Fareed, and criticized this administration for a lack of diplomacy towards North Korea or what they're doing to the State Department. So here you finally have a diplomatic initiative, but it's the wrong one. And it's actually, among other things, going to make it much more difficult for the United States to work with the Saudis and others against the Iranian imperial push. So we finally get some diplomacy. That's the good news. The bad news is it's a counterproductive example of it.
Because the Saudis, the Jordanians all say, look, to the Trump administration, they're saying this publicly, you've just complicated our lives because it's hard for us to ally with you while you're being so, seemingly one-sided on this issue.
All these regimes sit uneasily on top of their populations. This is an issue that has potentially real popular interest and emotion. And the Saudis in particular, who are so interested in consolidating power, this is just the sort of thing that might make it more difficult for them to be seen by their own people to be cozying up to the United States.
This and spending $500 million on $500 million on a painting and $500 million on a yacht, all in a few months.
All in the name of an anti-corruption campaign. Yes, it's hard to square that circle.
Hanan Ashrawi, Dory Gold, Richard Haas, thank you very much. Fascinating conversation.